When we accept that we are agents and participants in the future, then that question, where are we going? That is no longer an invitation for prediction. It's an invitation to participate in one future or another.
Welcome to the Dr Espen Podcast. I'm your host, Espen. Today I'm joined by Charles Eisenstein. He's a teacher, he's a public speaker, and he's an author who examines the unspoken narratives that direct our society and our lives. Charles' work covers a whole range of different diverse topics, including the history of human civilization, which is, of course, an important thing to be aware of, to know where we've been, to know potentially where we're going. His topics are about consciousness, economics, spirituality, interdependence, ecology, and how myth and story influence culture. He's the author of The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, Sacred Economics, which I've got at home, which is really a phenomenal read, and The Ascent of Humanity. So before we get into the questions, a very special welcome to Charles. How are you today, buddy?
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to our conversation. And thank you for the gracious introduction.
It's an absolute pleasure. Now, what would you say out of those topics is the best place for us to start? What's coming through for you right now?
Oh, so many people have been reaching out to me in a state of confusion and bewilderment. So I think that the last one you mentioned, the way that our unconscious stories and narratives and myths guide our society and our choices, I think that's really coming up for a lot of people right now. So we might talk about that.
That's beautiful. I was watching some of your work on Instagram actually earlier today, and that's the exact topic that came up. What's coming up for people, and what are you seeing?
So on one level, without being political, what everybody can agree on is a lot of certainties seem no longer very certain. And there are tremendous disruptions to the status quo, not just around the change in the US administration, but really intensifying over the last few years. Maybe you could trace it even back to Brexit. So that's happening on one level. On another level, and this is over a much longer span of time, the certainties around our economic system, our technology, our general way of life are also breaking down. The assurance that humanity's on the right path, things are getting better and better. Like that larger story is under severe stress. And then more recently, on top of it all, we have the drones and the UAPs and these data points that have infiltrated people's personal lives for a long time. They're now entering the collective awareness. So these are all creating a crisis in sense and meaning and identity that leaves a lot of people really confused.
I've sensed exactly the same. And there seems to be a lot of uncertainty, and people are asking questions such as, what's going to happen? What's coming? Is this, it's a conversation between, is it a mix between the Great Awakening, or is it going to go the other way? And I think a lot of people are really confused as to what to prepare, or what's coming and how to prepare. With your understanding of consciousness and your work across multiple different fields, what do you believe is happening on a collective level?
Yeah, you mentioned some possibilities. Some people think that we're spinning out towards dystopia, others that we are transforming as a civilization, as a species, ascending to a higher level of consciousness. And what those two viewpoints agree on is that this is something that you can predict. You can say this is happening and or that is happening. But what if the question isn't so simple? What if it's not a prediction, but more of a prophecy, more of a choice that involves ourselves? Like if I were going to flip a coin, you could predict heads or tails, and we both agree that I don't have anything to do with the result. But if it's, I don't know, if I'm a master magician and I can control the flip of the coin or influence it, that's a different story. So when we accept that we are agents and participants in the future, then that question, where are we going? That is no longer an invitation for prediction. It's an invitation to participate in one future or another. It's, oh, yeah, okay, where are we going? Let's talk about that. Let's envision that. Let's align with the future that we want to be part of. And that in itself is an example of the shift in narrative and mythology that that is the foundation of a new world, because it says it doesn't hold us as separate individuals, essentially powerless except for the puny amount of force that we can exert on reality. It acknowledges that the inner and the outer reflect each other, and that our power is much greater than the linear Cartesian mind can apprehend.
Oh, I love this because in the back of my mind, when I asked that question, there was a thought, and the thought was, if you have to ask that question, you're not part of co-creating the future that humanity is moving towards. I love that you just put the power, but right back to the people. If we're asking the question, what's coming, what's happening, we may not be asking the right question. What if the question was, how can I participate in bringing heaven on earth or making sure that it becomes a beautiful reality? How can I participate and what do I want to co-create? I love that. Thank you for putting the power straight back into our hands. And listeners and viewers, perhaps that could be an option right now to tune into. What do you want? And how do you want to participate in it? Oh,
Yeah.
this is lovely.
Yeah. Let's not predict it. Let's declare it.
Oh,
And that doesn't mean that we're oblivious to circumstances. We have an innate sense of what is possible and what is delusional. That's why I named the book The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. It's a sense that we have. Maybe we can't um, declare something that on some level we know is impossible. I don't know, Big Rock Candy Mountain, where lollipops grow on trees and the whiskey water fountain, okay, and pink fluffy unicorns. This is a sensing of different timelines, different paths in the garden of forking paths that converge upon this moment. And which one do I want to take? Which one am I aligned with? Which one is calling me into alignment with it? And that alignment, it's not only the way we think and the choices we make, but it's also the collaborations that we engage in and the things that we do collectively. And you find in all of these predictions of transcendence or dystopia, each one of them I find has an alignment with a certain part of myself. There's part of me that succumbs to despair and is stingy and grouchy and is nursing some kind of wound that maybe needs to be expressed in external circumstances so that it can be cleared, so that I can grow. So maybe I can declare, oh, the future, Espen, is going to be hippie planet where everybody is healing each other with their hands, and I can lay out this beautiful vision, and the children are free playing. And do I fully believe that? Do I fully resonate with that? Is there a part of me that maybe needs healing before I'm fully aligned with that? Because I have to admit, I have certain amounts of programmed scarcity thinking and insecurity. And so the declaration of what the future shall be is also a declaration of one's own healing intentions and commitment to a growth process.
very much. So the question potentially could be, what do I need to do for myself to heal, to grow, to evolve, to be
Mhm.
a beautiful space of love so that I could bring the real essence of me? What do you
Yeah.
what do you think today, Charles, if you study the things that you've studied, and I loved your work in sacred economics, there are some patterns that we're playing out. It seems as if there is this global shift happening. And as you bring this back to ourselves, and we get to tune into that within ourselves, what could be something, and listeners and viewers are now potentially also recognizing their power. We don't have to go without when we go within. Where's a good place to start?
The answer to that question is probably unique to each person. I'm not going to say that one specific practice or one specific cause is more important right now than another one. But I would say that each of us has a kind of inner guidance mechanism toward the most impactful, powerful action that may not be understandable by the rational mind. What arouses your care and your love, your generosity, the feeling of being in service to something that you love, to something beautiful. There's a kind of an ease, a serenity that you can identify that. And maybe that conforms to what your rational mind says is an impactful change making action in the world. And it meets all the metrics. And I'm reaching however many thousands or millions of people, and I can do the math and I'm having a big impact. But maybe it doesn't meet those metrics. Maybe what gives you that feeling of alignment is spending time with your grandmother in her last days. There's no metric that's going to illustrate the power of that choice. But it's those things, that's what we have to follow. Because if we're relying only on what we can calculate will change the world because it will scale or because it will go viral, it's actually hopeless. We have to engage greater powers than that. Yeah, so I would say that the answer is unique to each person and that you have a guidance system that doesn't involve fighting against yourself. It's actually aligning with what you're really here to do, and that feels good. It feels good to align with what you're here to do. The like the body doesn't lie. We could put it that way.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then sometimes maybe even to the extent if you're feeling depressed, if you're procrastinating a lot, is that something to overcome with willpower? Or could that be a signal from your soul
Mm.
that I don't want to get out of bed, I don't want to do it? Well, maybe that's because there's something else you're supposed to be doing right now. Maybe that is another kind of action. Maybe it's actually that you need to integrate and digest and rest for a while and abide in the empty space, especially when things fall apart, when these belief systems fall apart. That's happening to many people now. Your identity falls apart. You don't know what's real anymore. You don't know what to do anymore. And maybe that is a moment not to jump so quickly onto the next thing or to immediately grab for whatever sense of meaning and identity and belonging is offered to you by whatever charismatic personality or new trend, new fad. Maybe this temporary withdrawal from the world is a good thing. And maybe other cultures, they wouldn't call it depression. They would be like, okay, time for you to meditate in a cave for a few weeks. Time for you to go on a walkabout. So I think that there's a wisdom here that is when things get really confusing, it brings us back to that wisdom. And for each other, we can encourage each other to listen to that and support each other in that.
Mm. I'm getting truth bumps through my whole body as we talk on these topics. I think this is so important to discuss right now because I think a lot of people feel that they're at a crossroad and we shouldn't be experiencing pain and loss and distress. And it should be all these good feelings. I think this is beautiful. I looked up your website earlier and there was a topic there on unlearning.
Mhm.
It feels like there's a lot of that happening. And I'd love if you would go a little bit deeper into the unlearning of the false persona that I feel so many of us have tried to portray to be something that we're not, to fit into something that we can't fit into. And could this potentially be a unveiling of the falseness of, or maybe falseness is not the right word, but the letting go of the aspects of self that are no longer true to our own unique signature? What are your thoughts?
Mhm. Yes. So that would actually be maybe the deepest level of unlearning I made a little online course about it, and I'm trying to remember. I think I divided it into 4 levels, but one is unlearning beliefs about the world, about each other,
Yeah.
judgments, habits of judgment. It's more of habits of knowledge than the knowledge itself that we unlearn. And one of them is the story of who am I? And that develops through childhood and according to circumstances. It serves its purpose. But then when conditions change or when that role has completed itself or the drama that 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 role was part of is complete, then you don't want to stay in that role anymore. You want to move on. Um, who shall I be now? Who am I now? And some of the old answers don't make sense. And yeah, it can be really scary to leave the familiar behind. And where courage is insufficient, sometimes necessity will intervene and you just can't hold on anymore. That's happening to a lot of people too.
Oh, yeah.
And I just want to, because I just want to make, I don't want to make this as like some heroic thing that some people are able to do and some people aren't. Some people make the cut and some don't. Some people are able to unlearn and let go, and others they're just clinging and they're stuck. That is so ungenerous. And if you're ever in that situation yourself, maybe that's how you develop compassion for those in the situation of I'm trying and nothing's working. That we are tenacious beings. And even the process of holding on desperately and not letting go, maybe that develops muscles that are of tenacity that are useful later. And then the moment comes where you just let go. And is that because you just tried harder at that moment? Or is it because you just let go and you can't instruct somebody to do that and you can't instruct yourself to do that? Yet the possibility can still be helpful. The
It's remi-
concept, just let go.
oh,
Because then you recognize it. It's time.
wow. It reminds me of ceremony. When I started sitting in ceremony and I really deepened my prayer and my practice, so much of what came up in ceremony was the whole letting go process. And it could be a medicine ceremony, plant medicine ceremony, it could be a breath ceremony, it could be a meditation ceremony, it could be Vipassana, it could be anything. What I realized is just like how much shit I'm holding on to and how much stuff I'm trying to control. And I've seen it in business as well. Like I've got this franchise of this thing and it's happening and it's just all good and it's helping these people and it's falling apart. But I'm working so hard, but it's falling apart. My relationship, I'm trying so hard, but it's falling apart. This is what happens if you just let go.
Yeah.
It's scary though, hey?
Yeah. Because it might fall apart. Letting go isn't some trick to accomplish what you couldn't accomplish through control. Like what you were afraid of might actually happen. And ultimately, that's true of everybody. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong to cling on to life
Mm-hmm.
until the moment comes where it's no longer time to cling on to life and it's time to let go instead.
Yeah.
I guess I just sometimes I speak a little bit paradoxically. I just want to invite a little bit of ease around it, a little bit of gentleness and feeling of comradeship. Yeah, yeah. The part of your brain that says, "Okay, should I let go now or should I cling on now?" And like trying to figure it out. Maybe it's not something that can be figured out or reduced to some principle of now is the time and some distinction, or now isn't the time. And to understand that all in your mind and have a program, that's a form of control to reduce everything to a set of spiritual principles, metaphorical principles, metaphysical principles, a set of teachings. Now I know how to do it. Now I know how to do life. Got the instructions.
Got the manual.
Yeah.
Mm.
I tell you, I've been thinking about this for decades and I don't have the instructions. And there's many beautiful teachers out there who do have the instructions, and those can be really helpful. I don't want to denigrate the 12 habits of successful people or whatever it is. But if those aren't working for you, you're not the only one. And there is a mystery beyond any of these teachings. At some point, the teachings become an obstacle.
Yeah. And so it becomes the attachment to what was, and
Yeah.
not necessarily surrendering to what is becoming. And I think this is a beautiful conversation and a very pertinent time. And I think and I'll paraphrase, but what if your soul is, what if sadness and depression and anxiety or whatever the symptom might be, what if that is a sign from your soul to move you, to evolve you into a new level of beingness? So really interesting conversation. I loved how you brought in gentleness and that compassion piece of it, because right now I think that tenderness is necessary. And I think the acceptance of what is and the allowance of what may come is going to be a big part of that surrendering process. Like I mentioned with some of my previous businesses, it was amazing and all that. And then it doesn't matter how hard I work and what I do. And I could always hustle and grind a little bit more, but it's just it wasn't working. And so when I let go of it, this incredible opportunity arises. And then in hindsight, I can see it now, but it's so difficult to see it when we're in it, isn't it? It's just clouded by the emotion and the human experience itself.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then there are those phases where you're working really hard and you know that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a lot of hard work. I don't think either of us are saying never work hard. Some things, like if you're going to build a house, you're not just going to sit there drinking margaritas and the house gets built, but you have to like, and our creative capacities love to be used, and it feels good to use them. It feels good to work, especially when it's something that you believe in and it's beautiful to you. So I'm not advocating any kind of withdrawal from the world, but it's just very Taoist. When it's time to work, when you're hungry, eat. When you're tired, sleep. When it's time to rest, and that's the Tao, and the Taoist learns to recognize those calls.
Mm.
Yeah,
The Tao does nothing, yet leaves nothing undone.
right.
It's a powerful book. But again, that's one's philosophy. And I agree with you. There is this bridging of potential, all these different aspects, these different worlds. If you were to study on that, let's observe the higher planes. Let's look at timelines, cycles, seasons, what's happening, the transition that we're in. On a planetary level, the age of Aquarius, and we have the movement of planets, we have a lot of light entering the atmosphere, we have the expansion of consciousness, the potential awakening. And you may say that I'm incorrect, and I'm not saying that I am correct. I'm just hypothesizing here. With the potential awakening of dormant DNA, with the awakening of the potentials of the brain that may have not been activated. They say 98% of our DNA is junk DNA. We know that's not true. We know that there's faculties within the human potential that is dormant or at least not activated to its full potential. What are your thoughts on what may be happening and what we actually may be capable of if and when we activate these dormant faculties?
Yeah. So I like to look at it through the lens of myth and story, and the mythology that has held civilization for a long time is breaking down and transitioning into a mythology. The answers to the basic questions of why are we here and what's real and what's possible and where do we come from and where are we going, and these basic questions. So as this mythology changes, we are being born into a different sense of what is real and a different sense of who we are. From that place, so much is possible that the old story said was impossible. And so you're referencing some of these latent capacities of the human being, the body, of the brain, of the mind, of the DNA. And we are invited into that story and into those possibilities. To accept that invitation, there are things that we have to let go of. We have to let go of the old story and all of our attachment to it. And some of the possessions of maybe material possessions, but especially ego possessions that are part of that story and habits that come from that old story. And every time that we act from the new story, we bring ourselves more fully into it. It's like an offering. For example, one way that I articulate the new story is the story of interbeing, which understands that we're not really separate. That it's not that we're all one, but it's that there is a mirror of you inside of me. That every person, every ecosystem, every being in the world mirrors something in myself, and that therefore your well-being and my well-being are connected. The well-being, my well-being and the well-being of the Amazon is connected. Not necessarily that I'll die without the Amazon, but a world denuded of the Amazon rainforest will be poorer. Something will die within me. It's not that I'll die if you die, or if a culture dies, or if a people dies, if an ecosystem dies, but something will die in me because that's part of me. Okay. So that's one of the elements of what I call the new story. It's also a very ancient story, but for now, let's call it the new story. If you accept that as more than just an idea, your behavior will be a lot more generous to others because you understand that what you give, you're actually also receiving on some level. So the programming of separation, the programming of maximizing rational self-interest, it loses its motivation from within that story. But it's still strong in most of us. That programming is still strong. But every time that we defy it and say, no, in this situation, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be unguarded. I'm going to trust my instinct that it is safe to trust this other person. Anytime we affirm the new story through an act of maybe some small courage, and I'm going to be generous now, then it's a kind of a declaration of, yeah, I accept this story. I receive this story and all that it unlocks in myself and the world. All of these miraculous capacities that you're referencing, they become available. But it's a choice. You have to enter that doorway, and it takes some courage to walk through. There's always that moment of, ooh, do I really want to give this gift to somebody? Do I really want to let go in this way? Do I really want to accept this? It's a choice point.
Comes back to
Yeah, and I'd say that if I can declare what the future is going to be, which is what kind of you invited me to do, I would say we are living in the time when a critical mass of us make that choice, and we collectively enter into a new story that rebuilds the world in its image. All of our systems, all of our institutions are recreated in alignment with the story of interbeing. And that's the book you about, Sacred Economics. That's exactly what it's about. What would money look like from a new story?
exactly. I loved it. And I think I love how you redefined unity consciousness with interbeing. Because I think sometimes if you discuss with someone, yeah, we're all connected and we're all one. And hang on, Charles is over there, Espen's over here. Charles has got a beard and Espen does not. So we're not. That's the ego. That's the illusion of separation.
Yeah.
But the interbeing, that's very different because I can feel and sense, know, and declare that I am one with you in certain ways. And that's special. I think that'll override a lot of the limiting beliefs of unity consciousness that we've been conditioned to believe, perceive, and therefore actually achieve to be a reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it helpful because this whole realm that we're in right now, it is about separation in a sense. We're born as an individual and we perceive other individuals and we play roles that require differentiation. So even if you say each of us is God looking out from a different set of eyes, it's still a different set of eyes. And in order to have on a like really deep metaphysical level, maybe God got bored and divided God's self into gazillions of pieces in order to enact incredible dramas. And you can get theological about it, but to say, oh, we're all one, and to reject the dramas that are available here and the ways of developing yourself and creating that are available in this play, in this theater, that's like a rejection of a gift. We're not here in material reality just to transcend material reality and get out of here as soon as possible. Yeah, that's why I prefer the lens of interbeing to that of unity. Yeah, in most situations, anyway.
May I throw a hypothesis at you? I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah.
Creator God, choose your word for it, is everything everywhere beyond space and time and is just divine knowing, consciousness, and love, right? Whatever. God decides to separate himself, herself, itself, down past levels, layers, densities, and dimensions. We enter the third dimension. We pass through the veil of forgetfulness. We forget that we are unique expressions of the one. And as we go into division, forgetting that we are interconnected, we fight and we go through that, and we forgot who we were and where we came from. And so we can create war and poverty and things that are horrible. And some might ask, if there's a God, why are these things in existence? My hypothesis would be that if there is such a thing as God, which I dearly know in my being there is and that I am, and if this divine being has separated itself into all these different aspects and unique aspects of the self to experience, to learn, to grow, to heal, to whatever, and as it separated so far that aspects of itself forgot about itself, could it be that this divine being is calling to itself its own pieces through our process of what we call the human experience? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the storylines that has some appeal, that we entered the journey of separation in order to experience the grandest drama of all, that of coming back home together. Interesting. That's one way to understand it. And you've probably had experiences in medicine or meditation where that linearized story is also just a very small facet of the truth. Interesting that you mentioned the veil of forgetfulness, but we don't actually entirely forget. There's still, on some level, a knowing that this isn't the whole reality. And what situation or what human experience touches that is humor, especially when even sometimes happens in the midst of conflict, where two enemies or two spouses are fighting about something, and then all of a sudden they just start laughing because it just is okay. Hold on, this is ridiculous. There's another reality here of love that just makes us all ridiculous.
Mm.
It even happens. I've heard stories about the political realm. Two countries are in negotiations and they're around the negotiating table shouting at each other. And then it's time for a break. And there they are meeting the same people around the water cooler. And they're laughing and they're joking around and they're like, okay, now we're dropping the role and we're going to be in reality. So humor can be like a momentary dropping of all of the seriousness, of all the buy-in to this drama. And then we take it up again. And it's not a bad thing. Like, it's the same actually as an actor in a play. If you're a Shakespearean actor, when and you're putting on a show, a performance of Hamlet, it would be very inappropriate to say, your father didn't really die. This is just a play. Doesn't matter. Like, you don't do that. You actually, to be an actor, you have to pretend to believe. You have to enter the role. And just like in life right now, there is still a little part of you, a little part of that actor that knows he's being an actor. And it's the same with us. On some level, there's this ember of a transcendent awareness, of a transcendent being. And I think sometimes it is helpful to visit that knowledge and then to come back to the drama. And maybe we're here to play it really well.
A play, hey?
It's one way to look at it. Take it for what it's worth, but
Great point.
it helps me sometimes.
I love the humor. I know for me, in aspects of my life, I've taken life, what I believe is way too seriously. I love the notion of humor and bringing that back into our reality.
Yeah. We could use a bit more of it. Like, one thing, when people get dogmatic and when society really starts to degrade and spin toward conflict, it's when people can't laugh anymore. It's when humor becomes, like, when the seriousness overcomes the humor, and that's not funny. And there's no opportunity for conflicting parties to step out of it and into a reality that's bigger than their conflict. So it's really important. It's like almost the last hope when people are getting deeper and deeper into the role, the drama of enemy, and they just cannot relate to each other as human beings. Humor is sometimes the only thing that can pierce the veil of forgetfulness.
Oh, bringing it back. Where outside of your own mind are you getting this information from?
It's just very logical.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm exploring a story. I'm like, okay, I've had experiences that suggest the story of interbeing to me and various dimensions of that story. And I'm like, okay, let's take that as true and weave together those truths and reason forth from them. If that's true, then this has to be true. And if that's true, then that has to be true. And so I'm building out a story. It's a little bit similar to what a mathematician does. I studied math in college, so I often use this as a metaphor. You take a set of axioms, could be the Euclidean axioms of geometry. You say, okay, given this, then what can we prove from this set of axioms? Oh, you can prove the Pythagorean theorem, or you can prove all kinds of things. And then you say, okay, let's take a different set of axioms. What can you prove from that? And it's a different thing. In non-Euclidean geometry, it's no longer true that there's only one parallel line running through a point adjacent to another line. It's no longer true. Different axioms. That's part of what I mean by a mythology and migrating into a different mythology and exploring it. But it's not just an intellectual exercise. It also corresponds to a state of being, a way of relating, a state of consciousness, which isn't a higher or lower consciousness. That whole idea is kind of part of the story of separation, that, you get more and more conscious consciousness is already absolute. We don't get more and more conscious, but we become conscious of different things. So what I see is in humanity now is a readiness to adopt a different mythology, a different story, a different consciousness, a different way of being, because we've completed the drama. And maybe we're still, I'm very disheartened sometimes when I'm like, really again? Like the ancient pattern of scapegoating that results in genocide, or scapegoating of dissidents, censorship and cancellation and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, really? The same pattern? Really? I thought we were done with that one. Okay, maybe we need another iteration of it to really be done with it. Maybe it hasn't played out all the way. But this is my declaration, as opposed again to prediction, is and that maybe you could even call it a prophecy, which is words that create the truth that they state, which is that we're freaking done with this. We're done with this drama. We want a new story. We have grown to its limits, and we're ready to molt. We're ready to metamorphosize, and let's declare that readiness, and let's demonstrate that readiness in whatever choice point arises for you after you're done listening to this conversation. Let's declare our readiness with an action that communicates to our unconscious that, yeah, I am done with it. See, here's the choice I just made.
This is exactly the thought that I was having as you were speaking. I'm on a flight tomorrow from Dubai back to Australia, and I'm going to write out my new story.
And you might have opportunities on that flight, before that flight, at the airport, to disrupt the story of separation for the people you interact with. It could be like a moment of kindness and humor to the airline personnel, or a joke. Sometimes if there's flight delays and there's like this really harried airline representative and every person in line is frustrated, like I might come up and maybe commiserate a little bit and say, in case you're not busy enough, I have a request for you. And that is a way of stepping out of the drama, isn't it? It's, okay, here we both stand for a moment outside of all of the seriousness of I got to get there. And I recognize you as a human being having your own subjective experience of all of this. And so I create a moment of connection, like a moment of recognition of our non-separation. And when that becomes an orientation, then you are in service to that new story. And I'm not claiming to be always in service to that. I might be really grouchy. I might have whatever going on. But then I'm fortunate that maybe somebody comes along and gives me that word of kindness or humor and pulls me back into that story, back into the recognition. And so I'm hoping maybe that, as so many have done for me, maybe this conversation will do for those listening and do for you, Espen. And that way we keep awake that part of ourselves that wants to align with a new story. Yeah, so maybe you'll have some good opportunities tomorrow.
Absolutely. It is.
Yeah.
I'm going to spark some joy and bring some humor and put a skip in my step and see what happens organically and naturally. This is a really good reminder.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And just listening to the way you share, teach, think, it's as if we're discussing philosophical concepts with the simplicity of the mind without making it too complex. And again, potentially also seeing the different sides of it as to what's going to be unique for us and what we can adopt. I really appreciate this conversation. And there's a lot of presence here, and there's a lot of depth here, and there's a lot of care here. So I want to really acknowledge you for sharing this time with us and taking the opportunity to allow us to ponder these concepts and to find ourselves in new ways, perhaps.
Thank you for providing the opportunity and the openness and the humility. I appreciate it.
It's an honor. I know many of our listeners and viewers want to learn more, so I'm going to give them the opportunity to do that now. The website is charleseisenstein.org. So charleseisenstein.org. And socials, I loved it. Like I mentioned earlier, Charles, I was here in my hotel room preparing for our call now, scrolling through your Insta, and there was just like, boom, your voice is tonality about it that's just soothing. And I was really feeling good in my body listening to it. And the stuff that was coming through was just what I perceive as wisdom. Not wisdom from a dogmatic sense, but wisdom from a what if and consider this sense, which I loved. So let me just share a couple. We have the website, which we just talked about, which is charleseisenstein.org. Instagram is Charles_Eisenstein. Twitter is C. Eisenstein. And the list goes on and on. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners? Like I mentioned, I'll bring it up again. Your website. I love the little course you had on the website. That could be a great place to go. And of course, your books. Okay. These are some of my favorites. I mentioned before, Sacred Economics. If you love books, go and look into this book. Sacred Economics. You have The Yoga of Eating, which I think is awesome. The Ascent of Humanity, which we just discussed. And The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. That's next on my list. So
Yeah, that one's probably the most accessible.
Yeah.
Like the least demanding of the reader. Like Ascent of Humanity, that's 600 pages. But I also have two more recent ones called The Coronation, which is about the COVID era, and Climate, A New Story, which is, like the title says, a very different take on the ecological situation.
Good.
And I also have a Substack. I write on Substack also. That's where most of my recent writing is. I'm not actually on social media a lot. My team posts snippets, though. I do have a Substack, and that's where most of my recent writing is.
That is charleseisenstein.substack.com. We'll put that in the show notes, of course. Charles, before we wrap up, I've got one last question for you straight off the cuff, if I may, please.
Happy to, yeah, sure.
Let's go. Here's the question. I want you to imagine, please, that you are on the world stage. Every sentient being alive has gathered, watching, tuning in, and they're present, and they're ready to hear your message to the world. Whenever you're ready, take a breath, take your time, and do share, please. What is your message to the world right now?
It's hard to make such a general message when anything that universal is a platitude, a cliche. I think more important than what the message is to be in a state of authenticity. What is authentic in any conversation is a product of that moment. Sometimes I might face somebody, you might face somebody, and all the blather gets in the way of intimacy. And you feel like you're just putting on a show, putting on the Espen show, putting on the Charles show. And you walk away from that thinking, yeah, we didn't really connect. All the more if I were speaking to every sentient being. So I feel like I don't think I would have anything universal to say, but maybe anything I would say would be enough. Even if I said, I have nothing, like, why are you looking to me for wisdom? That's not good. Why am I the center of everything right now? That's not as it should be, because I genuinely don't know what I would say to everybody. And why am I here saying it to everybody now? Like, who put me in this spot? Yeah, it's hard for me to answer hypotheticals. That's what it is. Because it would depend on how that situation arose. Because how it arose would determine what the listening would be. Like, what if the situation were that I had been falsely accused and condemned for the greatest crime ever imagined, so that the whole world wanted to see what I had to say for myself before my execution? That would be a very different thing that I might say than if I'd just been elected Grand Poobah of the world. But then there's one more. I hope I'm not going on too long for this question, but I mean, there's another truth that you're suggesting here, which is that, in fact, each of us at every moment has an audience of every sentient being in the universe, in the sense that everything that we do is felt. Everything that we say every thought that we have is connected in some mysterious way to everything else. So I would like to, and so maybe the situation you describe is a moment of realizing that is always true and that we remember love, we remember who we really are in those moments. We remember that knowledge that does survive the travel through the veil of forgetfulness and carry that awareness on a deep level and so that it colors all that we do. Yeah.
I have been doing these interviews for a while, and I know that my mind is often busy, and I often have things to say when I should not speak. And I realized, for me, what I received is when I asked you the question, and your answer was nonverbal in the beginning. There was a lot of depth in that, and it's the first time I've come across that stillness. So there was a lot of answer in that without words, and including the words that you chose to use. But I just wanted to mention that was really profound for me. So thank you very much.
Yeah, when I do live public speaking, I often have very long pauses like that. Online, it doesn't always work so well, but I'm glad that you acknowledge that, and it'd be cool if you preserve that in the recording.
Absolutely. We're not
Yeah,
going to change a thing.
yeah.
Charles, it's been an absolute honor having you on the show. Thank you so much for your time, for your care, and for everything that you've shared with us. It has been deeply impactful for me, and I know it's going to be impactful for our listeners and viewers as well. And yeah, at some point in the future, would love to have you back. And in the meantime, we're going to send you all the love and all of the blessings your way to your beautiful family and everything that you're about and your work and the things that you stand for. So thank you once
Thank you,
again.
Espen. Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolute privilege. Thank you, Charles.